We were building a platform for other parts of the organization to deliver customer-facing products, right? When I walked in, we didn't have a product manager. The team had these ideas about how incredibly useful their platform was and how all these teams appreciated it. And then when I went to actually talk to the teams, they complained all the time about all the issues about dealing with that team. So one of the things that I did was take people from the team individually on these listening tours. So we'd actually go and talk to other teams and have them in the room, and they had to listen to what the customers of their platform were saying. And some of them did not like it at all. But then we did bring in a really great product manager who sat there and he started to just pivot and say, look, let's talk about how you guys measure success and make sure that aligns with how the teams measure success. It might not be around utilization, it might be around reliability is more important.
Welcome to Productside Stories, the podcast where we reveal the very real and raw lessons learned from product leaders and thinkers all over the world. I'm your host, Rina Alexin, CEO of Productside. Let's dive into today's episode. Joining me today is Guy Gershoni, Head of Engineering at Genesit Consulting. He comes with over 20 years of experience in software engineering, AI, and data. He's led engineering teams across startups and enterprises, helping them scale while staying lean and modernizing their operations to build better products. Guy has been nominated by product leader and now founder Li Jia as someone who can talk to the very real need for us to break down silos between product and engineering and craft a really powerful partnership. Excited to talk to you, Guy. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Rina.
So, Guy, this is going to be a unique episode. Why? Because stakeholders matter. Product management cannot get anything done without our partners. And that is why I wanted to invite you on the show, because we want to hear from you, from engineering. How do we work better together? And
absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, I always like to find out what drew you, rather than to product management, but to engineering in the first place. Tell us about your background.
Oh, I've always liked computers better than humans. I think they were a lot more predictable. I was introduced to them as a kid, and then I sort of got into IT back in the 90s. And in the 90s, IT wasn't very fashionable. It wasn't yet a good job to do. It was very much the enclave of nerds and sort of outsiders. If I'm going to spend the next 30 years working, trying to make a good living, I'd rather be in the basement with sort of the interesting people. Honestly, that's what kind of drew me to IT, was just sort of the people who were doing IT at the time, which were really, really interesting in the 90s. And then it sort of evolved from there. I have to say, I was very disappointed because I remember being told in high school and uni that, we'd have 4 major career changes in our lives because the economy was becoming a lot more fluid and flexible. But yes, you're very polite saying 20 years. It's closer to 30 years now. I've been in IT. But the other thing that really interests me in IT is, even though you are doing IT, I've explored so many different worlds and sort of domains in that period, and also been exposed to different parts of sort of the IT life cycle as well. So if you're a very curious person, IT is a really great place to be.
Well, Guy, in terms of what you just said, I feel like most of us feel at one point or another like we are the outsiders. And so I just wonder how many interesting basements full of creative people there are, but lovely to have you. So
Yes.
You were nominated because you have successfully crafted a great relationship with your product counterparts.
Yes.
Can you tell us about your view of product management?
Look, I think product management is absolutely essential. I think that there is this misconception that engineers just want to build stuff well and don't necessarily care about what they build, but that's not true. Like when I've worked with engineering teams and we've provided either by the product or ourselves have sort of crafted feedback mechanisms to understand how our product is being used, either via watching our customers through, website metrics, but also talking to various other sort of parts of the business, engineers are much, much, much happier and more excited about building stuff that people value. And so, this is the irony. I remember having this discussion with one tech leader, and he was like, "Oh, we should use this really interesting framework and this very interesting technology stack." And I sort of said, "Look, it doesn't really matter as long as we feel we're actually contributing and adding value and people appreciate it, we can write it in COBOL for all we care." So I think at the end of the day, uh, if you see engineering teams that are obsessing about framework and tooling, it's usually because they haven't been given enough feedback or direction to focus on the bigger picture. But intrinsically, they want to do stuff that's valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine there's anybody that wants to spend part of their career building something cool and shiny that nobody wants. And
Mm,
that happens too often, right?
yeah.
I like to think about, when we talk from a business perspective, oh, there's all this money wasted, but I like to think about the careers, right?
Mm,
Some time was
mm,
wasted building this product. So, the best way to avoid that, to your point, is to have a really healthy relationship between
yes.
product and engineering, where both sides really understand their role and what they bring to the table. What do you think makes for a really healthy relationship?
I think what's really healthy is at least a common ground and mutual understanding, right? So I don't expect a product manager to have the depth in IT knowledge and sort of architecture and stuff like that that myself or some of the people working in my team would have. Nor do I expect my people to have the depth of understanding of the market and product market fit and various other sort of product thinking. But I expect both sides to know enough to be able to talk to each other and ask the right questions. I mean, that really, actually, to be honest, Rena, it's just about asking the right questions. This is what we're trying to do. These are some of the things we think would work in the market. How could we go about implementing them? Hey, by the way, Rena, we've got some enablers at the moment. AWS has released X, Y, and Z. We could easily and cheaply do this and that. What does that open up any opportunities for you? So as long as there's sort of this sharing, asking of questions and shared knowledge, and also learning from each other. Like, as engineers, we love those aha moments. We love those sort of like pops in the head. And so when we sit there and look at sort of data of usage, or we try and experiment and something unexpected happens, the engineers will get excited and they love that. And then they'll, start coming and saying, how can we help with that? So sort of bringing that on the journey. And some of the most constructive conversations we've had as well hasn't been necessarily about building the features, but building the enablers in order to enable experimentation. And so yeah, we'll talk about that a bit
Yeah,
later as
I
well.
want to
Yeah,
talk.
yeah.
I definitely want to talk about experimentation. I think that's really important, and both teams need to be, I think, very much in sync to do this well, because people can
Mm.
run completely the wrong types of experiments.
Yeah, oh gosh,
However,
yes.
okay, so I actually want to dig into this. You just said that engineers, we love these like light bulb moments, these aha moments,
Mm.
and I almost wonder if there could be more communication of the wins
Yes.
between product and engineering. So tell me about that. Like, what gets an engineering team really excited that product might be able to, I don't know, maybe communicate better so that they can get more of those kinds of moments?
Look, I think so. Engineers, we like numbers and we like objective sort of database decision making. This is what we're comfortable with. We sort of get trained in big O, little o, algorithm analysis, all that kind of stuff. So and it's very easy sometimes when you're not in that world to sort of go, I think this is right because that's what my gut tells me, right? As opposed to if you're sort of sitting there going, hey team, this is the data we've collected. This is how we've been interpreting the data and why. These are the assumptions we're making, and these are some of the predictions which we need to try and test. That speaks a lot more to how engineers think and get excited. And then also bringing back and saying, are there ways that you can help me get to run these experiments or understand what's going on better? Because I guarantee you 99 times out of 100, Rena, the instrumentation and the observability isn't there yet. A lot of the time when we're working in healthy companies where we're sitting there trying to do, database decision making, and we're sort of setting these sort of success criteria up front about we're doing this in order to see this kind of shift, the OKR, objective key result type stuff. Um, a lot of the time we have to stop and go, right, well, we need to actually build out the capabilities to measure this stuff because we don't have that. And if we don't measure it, it's obviously not important. I think that sort of hats on. But that being said as well, once that trust is being built, both engineers and products do have very powerful intuition abilities, right? Both of us can sense certain things. So I think that's important. The other thing that's really important is not just looking at the short term, but also looking at the broader and longer term. And the reason that that's important is because engineering is all about compromises and cutting the right corners. And you can only really do that when you have enough information. So, one of the things I see usually when I walk into engineering team, there's two extremes. There's the cowboy engineering where things were built and there was no design. And that eventually gets you sort of painted into a corner. And then there's the other extreme where it's sort of analysis paralysis. I'm sort of dealing with that right now where it's just like, look, just write something. Like just stop worrying about, what's going to happen in 2 years' time, because if we don't do something in the next 2 weeks, we're not going to be here anymore. So it's sort of finding that, and what's important for an engineer and the engineering team to understand is where you feel things are going and where there's need to be flexible and where there's opportunity to cut corners or, there's no need to sort of dive deeper from a technical perspective.
Yeah, the perfectionist in me, like, no, cutting corners. But you're right. You
Yeah.
have to make trade-offs. It's impossible to go like that. That perfection should not really be the goal. It should be it should be some, I don't know what to call it. It's not perfection. It's that you
Yeah.
have to make it workable, but
Yes.
you have to do so much testing that aiming for perfection at the start is the wrong thing to do. And I actually think that goes in line with experimentation,
Yes.
right? Sometimes when a business decision is made to go in a certain direction, what ends up happening is, well, okay, an executive approved a project, and now you're all in, and
Mm.
there's so many things that you don't know yet. And I think that a lot of companies really, and also product and engineering, struggle with what is the right experimentation framework. You cut things down to smaller bite-sized pieces that you can actually tackle as a team in a shorter time frame. So let's actually talk about that now, since
Yes.
you brought it up,
Cool.
the importance of experimentation. So what kinds of experimentation frameworks do you like to use that you found successful?
I don't use formal frameworks. I'm going to plead ignorance, but it's more in the sense of we'll do something. So, as I sort of was mentioning, one of my bosses used to have this concept saying there's too much poo running in production. And that's a problem, right? The more code that's running in production that isn't very useful, the more vulnerabilities you have and attack vectors and more cognitive load to make any changes as well. So we talked about, I think previously, around technical debt and how instead of thinking about debt, which from an engineer perspective is a bad thing because we're not business people see debt as leverage and that's an advantage. We talk about it more as increased risk. So the more guff you have, the harder it is to make changes, the slower and more dangerous it is. And that's what we talk about technical risk, right? And so what we do is before you write something, before you put something, you sit down and you agree together with all the stakeholders, what is going to be the change we want to see with this feature. So for example, you have a OKR over where your objective, which is something that you can measure but can't directly change, is like, oh, we want to increase conversions by 0.3%. Right. And then we are going to sit there and we're going to do 4 things that we can do, which we think will improve conversions. Right. And we'll say if it can do 0.2, we'll iterate on it. 0.3, we keep it. Less than that, just delete it. Right. So keep, iterate, delete, kid. And that's where we sort of sit. That's the kind of experimentation we've done. Okay, we've done it. Are we seeing the change we want? If we are, great. Let's build on that. If we're not, delete it. It's not important. I think for me, experimentation isn't just what you're building from a feature. It goes all the way up to, as an organization, culturally, is remote working better than hybrid working or in the office working? Let's not make assumptions. Let's experiment. Let's try and see. And how do we objectively measure our productivity as well? So yeah, it's sort of a culture of experimentation and being bold enough to say we know that we don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to be comfortable with the experiment going the way that you don't want it to go. Like there are
Mm,
a lot of times where it's like, no, I really want to, like you're saying, increase conversion, and I think this is going to work. And sometimes I find that teams, and maybe you have something to say about this, the experiment that they are conducting might need more time than what
mm,
they are kind of allowing. Maybe
mm,
conversion data doesn't come in after 2 weeks. Maybe you need 4 weeks
exactly.
for that kind of experiment. But also just knowing going into something, I like to tell people try to prove yourself wrong
Yeah.
versus falling in love and trying to find every single reason to confirm your hypothesis. Like your goal
Yes.
is to prove yourself wrong and then you win either way, right?
Yeah. A good scientific, thinking, right? Like we have the hypothesis, we try and disprove the hypothesis, and then if we can't, then we know that it's correct. And you're right. I mean, look, sometimes the answer is as clear as day. We did this shopping cart conversion, and it was absolutely the original shopping cart was horrible. It took like 30 seconds to click between screens. It was ancient and horrible, and so we sort of quietly wrote like a sparse single page app. This is way back, when this was still fairly new, and suddenly the cart was just incredibly snappy, and we saw revenue increase by like 60%. So we that was clearly okay. A was B, and we used to do the other. Like that was an interesting organization because we didn't have the money to build a lot of automated testing and verification. And so I was sort of originally brought in because I had a very strong background in developing complex automation test suites. Where we want to invest is in our nimbleness, our ability to deploy and roll back or roll forward changes quickly in a safe way. And then technically it was a very interesting project because we also started doing things like containerization and segmentation and incremental improvements. But our main focus was being able to move fast. That was really important. And then what we said, well, what inputs do we have that can tell us whether we made a mistake or not? And I hate to say it, unfortunately, our customers were our best testers. But what we figured is that right now, and again, this is one of my mantras, is I think it's a US Marines thing of like, just make today better than yesterday. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be better than yesterday. So when we started, the site would have issues, and it would take a while for us to find out there was an issue, and it would take quite a while to fix those issues. Now, if we could just at least reduce the amount of time to fix those issues, we're already better. But then we sort of said, hey, the customer service system, we can actually tap into its API and see if there's any spikes in traffic. And so we just get into this habit at one stage of just deploying our changes into production, grabbing a coffee, watching the various graphs to see that user behavior is still consistent and there isn't a spike in customer service. And if that was okay, great. If it was, it's like, yep, we screwed up, quick roll that back. So even so it wasn't, as you said, perfect or ideal, it was still light years ahead of where we were. And it gave us the bravery and the capital, emotional and sort of business capital, to sit there and build even better solutions going forward.
So, Guy, I'm really enjoying this conversation, especially because at some parts I feel like I'm talking to a product leader, and then you bring in the actual technical aspects of it, and I'm like, no, it's definitely engineering. This is amazing. But so Guy, just what you're saying, I'm now thinking like, how often does it happen that product management is actually working directly with engineering on the success metrics and like the data measurement? Because I feel like, does it even happen? Does this happen often at all?
The answer is not very often. This is why Lee and I enjoyed working together so much and have recommended each other, because we were able to have really wonderful, robust conversations together, and we both contributed to each other's area. So from engineering side, we'd bring in our perspectives, but also put in on our customer hats on, and he took those in, and Lee would also come back with various technology solutions he'd seen and said, look, if we integrated X, how would that be? Because a lot of the time too, one of the problems I work with as an engineering leader, engineers tend to like to sort of reinvent the wheel. right? Because the wheel is valuable, that it's something that's very useful. And so having that sorted, it's very tempting from an engineering perspective, go, now I'm just going to build a better wheel because I know that if I build a better wheel, it's going to have value. And that's a disaster for most companies, right? And so one of the things I come in is sit with engineering and go, hey, you're building a customer management system here. No, we're going to integrate with an existing one. Or, hey, you're building a content management system here. No, we're going to integrate with something else. But then those conversations where we're sort of going, right, we need to focus our energies on what is unique and builds, business IP, Lee was actively involved in helping us pick sort of other sort of external systems, and reviewing them and stuff like that. And then we'd have these interesting discussions where we wanted to do A/B testing about attracting people to the site instead of wasting a lot of energy building email tracking and blah, blah, blah. He'd be like, hey, let's go and use off-the-shelf mailing system X. And it's like, okay, with that one there, Lee, they've got an API. We can inject the data that we need to sort of make that a lot, easier for you to run that campaign. And if it works, great. And we'll, if it doesn't, we can move on. So I think it's sort of these really high quality, informed, discussions where we, and as you said, being brave enough to go, oh, whoops, we're wrong. Like I could show Lee, some of the skeletons in the closet, and he wouldn't freak out about it. We'd just go, okay, how do we work around those? And vice versa. He could tell me candidly about, look, these are things I don't know, or these are things I'm not sure about, and say, okay, well, can we do something about that? Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm just wondering, because at some point in our conversation, you did bring up that there often is like a data and success measurement problem. And
Yes.
it feels like, okay, well, engineering also gets excited by seeing the numbers, like the
Oh
results.
gosh, yes. Yes.
So this is, if we're going to be talking about, well, how do you create really healthy and strong relationships? We need to create more opportunity. I mean, we haven't talked about like what makes for a dysfunctional relationship,
Yes.
but we need to create opportunities for the celebratory wins. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking, this is kind of, and I'm sure not all product managers do this, but this is definitely an opportunity if somebody's working on a team that might not have a good relationship. It's how do you find these like wins that you could celebrate together? Do you have other
Yeah.
types of wins or ideas?
Look, I mean, we talked about toxic relationships, and I admitted to you that I was probably, part of the toxic problem in various previous roles. Because once I was asked that, it's like, oh, how do we bring the team together? What kind of team activities should we do? And I sort of looked at the person very sort of coldly and said, well, if we, deliver successful outcomes together, that will bring the team together. And that was, frankly, in retrospect, a bit of a dick, bit of a uncool thing to say, but it is true, right? Like I think there's definitely things we can do from a team building perspective to sort of break the ice, so to speak. But then I like to follow those up very promptly afterwards with like real world, okay, well, we've had the escape room fun, we've had a lavish dinner with a few sort of liquid lubricants, with alcohol and stuff, but now let's have these candid conversations. What does success look like? What does it look like from a product perspective? And from a product, putting your hat on as a product manager, ask the technical team, what would make you excited technically? Like what would you like to see in the technical solution that would make you really excited? And it might be conversations like, everyone's excited about AI, for example, but what does that mean for our organization? Where could we meaningfully use AI? And it doesn't necessarily need to be in the system itself. It might be like, well, Rina, I know you want a status report every week with all this detailed information. Can we work on a AI system that provides you, that report at a level you can share with, your peers, but requires less input from us? I mean, it might be back, and that's the other thing I think, which is really interesting, is we focus a lot on product development, on the customer-facing systems, but a lot of opportunities for building better businesses and better cultures is about ironing out all the issues on the back-end systems. So in one organization, we found out that the head of sales, she was spending 4 hours a day just transferring data from one system to another. And we went, well, hang on a second, you should be spending that time doing other things. Let's spend a week fixing that problem. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why oftentimes when it comes to IT, like specifically internal teams, internal product teams,
Mm.
I think the business stakeholders need to hear stories like this because they aren't necessarily they're typically seen as like a cost center versus a
Yes,
commercial, but
yes,
really they're enablers, right?
yes.
So it's like finding those opportunities are so important. Okay, so I want to ask you about dysfunctional relationships, right? We haven't really kind of gone in. You mentioned, okay, it's two sides get to play, both can
Yeah.
be a little toxic, but what do you think causes, or maybe are some common issues that you see that are, potentially dysfunctional between product and engineering?
So I was thinking about this. There was a very interesting startup I was involved with, which unfortunately never took off, called Transform to Grow, where there were sort of three of us highly experienced people. And we said the problem with digital transformations is that sometimes there's all this money and effort put in to do a digital transformation in a company, but the company isn't ready for it. There's various blockers that mean that no matter how much money and energy and resources you throw at the problem, it won't get fixed. It won't work, right? And so we're like, how do we identify these problem areas and allow companies to build the right foundations to do these digital transformations? And long story short, it was basically an extremely detailed questionnaires with the IP was really how we interpreted the responses for those. And it looked at all levels of the organization, from the CX level all the way down to the individual contributor level. And it never took off, by the way, because it was such a good diagnostic tool that no one had the guts to let us in and diagnose it, because it would also call out issues, at management. And the way we split it up was into three parts, which we called MAC. So MAC as in mindset, articulation, and capability, right? And going backwards, capability was the easiest to solve. Um, Guy, you're not working well with the product team because you don't understand enough product to have a good conversation with Rina, right? Let's send you off to some, product conferences, or, spend an hour, with Rina just having a coffee learning about product, capability, no problem, right? Articulation, much more complicated. I've got problems in the tech space that would impact your ability to, implement the features you want. But because I'm a hardcore nerd and, I can't communicate to you in your language what those issues are, and you might have also a similar articulation problem. You want certain things to come, features to be there for the product, but because for various reasons you can't communicate the why, and therefore I can't understand the what and the how. That's the articulation, and that's again more solvable, right? It requires probably more mentoring rather than training, and that we can
Repetition,
certainly done.
right? Like repetition, and because you're talking more, you're getting from the hard skills to the soft skills,
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And mindset is just a completely different mindset, right? You're coming in with an experimentation, agile, nimble mindset. I come from the old world of, telephone infrastructure, going, no, that's not how we do things, Rena. We plan it and then we spend a year and we build it and blah, 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 right? And unfortunately, what we found is once you get to mindset issues, there's very little you can do. I mean, like at the end of the day. And so that's where I think it's really sort of looking at, why is this relationship toxic? Is it to do with capability, articulation, or mindset? And if it's mindset, if there's really like we are just not on even remotely the same page, look, there's still things you can do. Is it fear-driven behavior? Is it that you're worried that if I understand too much of what's going on, I'm going to see, problems, or vice versa? But yeah, sometimes you just, there's not much you can do. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do like this. It's like the hard, and then the communication is its own
Yeah.
soft skill that can be improved, but certainly it's more complex.
Yeah.
But the mindset, honestly, I feel like I have these conversations all the time, even when it comes to how do you change organizations. Like
Yeah.
the mindset part is the hardest part, and that's the one that people really struggle with. So you're saying that exists on a one-to-one relationship or department level relationship as well, which honestly, it makes
Well,
so much sense. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think you also mentioned previously, and I agree with you, like there's this misnomer, like product manager has manager in the title. And yet usually product managers have very, very little positional authority. It's like,
Mhm.
and that's also this understanding of like, is my authority positional or influential or both? Right. So if you walk in going, I'm a product manager, therefore I will boss people and tell them what to do, but you don't have that positional authority, you're not going to make many friends. If it's more influential, then it's like, well, okay, what's the compelling story I can give the engineers that will bring them along on the journey and have them excited about what we're doing? But it's also, I've seen that where people have mixed it up, but there's also organizational dysfunction as well. Like, sort of sometimes where, look, I'm a believer in hierarchical structure but flat culture. I think what I've seen work badly is flat structures, because flat structures don't exist in reality. You can go into a room and say to 10 people, you all have the same level of authority, go make a decision together. But what will happen is that they will suss each other out and henpeck and all that kind of stuff, and there will be a structure emerging there, right? So it's better to have an objective hierarchical structure, but then encourage a sort of a flat culture. And if that's the case, well, if the engineering manager is the one that's going to be taken to task if the product doesn't succeed, then it's like, okay, well, I as a product manager need to work with the engineering manager to help them understand how I can make them look good at the next performance review or look good to their boss, So yeah, I mean, that for me was the biggest shock, Rena, when I went from being a heads down, bums up sort of keyboard engineer to being a people leader, is realizing how much of it is these sort of soft skills and influence. And that's not easy or as predictable as writing code.
So, Guy, to that point, and when we go into organizations where there is dysfunction between engineering and product, a lot of times
Mm,
product is reporting into engineering.
mm,
Uh, there are these organizational cultures where it's just whatever engineering says goes, and a lot of product managers in those situations feel like they don't have a voice.
yeah,
So, I mean, do you have any advice
because, yeah,
for
yeah.
product managers in that situation? Like, what should they do? Like, how do they get a voice, and how do they build that influence with the engineering work?
So that's an interesting one because we had this problem in one organization. And it was really interesting. We were building a platform, right? An internal platform for other parts of the organization to deliver customer facing products, right? And this was interesting because when I walked in, we didn't have a product manager, right? And it was really interesting because the team had these ideas about how incredibly useful their platform was and how all these teams appreciated it. And then when I went to actually talk to the teams, they complained all the time about all the issues about dealing with that team. And so there was this disconnect, right? So short term is one of the things that I did was basically take people from the team individually on these sort of listening tours. So we'd actually go and talk to other teams and have them in the room, and they had to listen to what the customers of their platform were saying. And it was interesting. Some of them did not like it at all and eventually ended up leaving the organization because it sort of busted their bubble. But then we did bring in a really great product manager who sat there and he started to just pivot and say, look, let's talk about how you guys measure success and make sure that aligns with how the teams measure success, right? It might not be around utilization. It might be around reliability is more important. mean? And so that's where sort of the product manager can adapt to and saying, well, I come out of product management school thinking that customer engagement might be the most important thing for me to drive. But actually, when I look at what Guy, as the engineering manager, is being measured on when he goes and talks to his boss, the CTO, it may be around reliability. Like right now, it's the fact that the website dies every week, that Guy's being taken over the coals. Hey, Guy, how do we measure reliability? What are some leading indicators that can tell us a problem might be coming about? How can we, try and alleviate it? So really sort of having that relationship and understanding also that, my priorities will evolve over time. However, I also think that's an organizational problem. Like why, and this is the problem we had in that organization, that the CTO didn't believe that product managers should be in back-end infrastructure systems. And we disagreed. My boss and I disagreed on that, but the CTO was so the CTO allowed us to have a product manager, but the CTO never measured our success with the sort of kind of metrics that meant sense to the product manager, if that makes sense.
Tell me more about why you defended the existence of a product manager in that department.
Oh,
Like why did
because I could see that the team was very well intentioned and wanted to build a compelling product, but didn't know how and didn't even know that they didn't know, you know? And so this is where I wanted someone who had that deep understanding and expertise around, you know, um, extracting that information out because it wasn't obvious. And so, and the other thing too is that even when we say, oh, reliability is a must-have when you're talking about an internal platform, it's not absolute, right? There's a level of reliability that we need to aim for that's useful. But then if you go beyond it, you're wasting time and capital. I mean, and so we needed someone who could have this very mature gray, able to see the grayscale rather than the black and white, to help us understand, as you said, where all those metrics and measurements need to be and help us keep on top of it. And for me, that was a full-time job. That was not something that I could do as an engineering manager or my engineers could do. We could enable it, we could participate in the conversations, but it's a full-time job to sort of really deeply understand what good looked like at that point in time.
Yeah, I think you're describing exactly what the role of the product manager is at organizations. And so when I hear engineering say there are some instances of companies where they've given up on product management and they think
Mm,
engineers should just make all the decisions.
mm.
And I think this is a really powerful reminder of, well, there is a role for product management. It is strategic. It
Yeah.
thinks bigger, things longer term, and it helps engineers also do what they do best.
Yeah, exactly.
Focus on the coding. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so Guy, I so enjoyed this conversation. I already asked you how can a product manager do better with engineering. So I'm going to ask you the corollary. What advice do you have for someone in engineering that's struggling with product management right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was advice given to me is go and get yourself into that world. Like as an engineer, you spend the first sort of 5-10 years learning how to build it right, right? And that is a pardon me, that is a really difficult skill to acquire. It's quite involved and nuanced, and it's a really interesting intellectual journey. Going, how do I build it right? How do I build something that's solid and flexible and performant? Right? Great, you've done that. Now you need to learn how to build the right thing. And I think that, and once this is the problem, I'll be really blunt. A lot of engineers can be very arrogant because engineering is extremely deep skilled sort of profession and it's very objectively obvious when you're doing it right and when you're doing it wrong. And so they kind of, and I'm guilty, you kind of think I'm the smartest person in the room, right? And that the first thing to do is to go, look, That's dangerous. That's, as you said before, like that's a cognitive bias. You're not. And so starting to walk in other people's shoes, into the product manager's shoes, and trying to understand the business and the stakeholders and the people using your software, because as an old boss used to say, we're not running a charity here. We're trying to run a business. How is what you're doing contributing to the business's health and success? That can then open them up to the point that they can really sit down and go, oh, now I can understand the decades of work that Rina's put into her vocation of being a product manager, and not only appreciate it, but work with her to leverage that and make for great outcomes.
Well, Guy, that advice is honestly, it's music to my ears, because at Productside, we talk so much with product managers, encouraging them. You have to walk a mile in sales shoes and engineering and marketing. You have to
Yeah,
have all this empathy. And to get some of that love back from
yeah.
some other departments would be amazing. So, Guy, thank you so much for joining me and for
Thank you,
sharing
Rina.
so much great advice and wisdom. How can our audience connect with you after they listen to this recording?
Okay, well, obviously LinkedIn is the easiest, so Guy Gershoni. I do also have a website which I need to get back to. You reminded me about it, called Strategic and Heuristic IT Management, so shit.management, where I've got some articles and we'll put some more in there.
Wonderful. We'll include it in the description so that everybody can please connect with Guy and check his website out. And
Cool.
for everyone, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Productside Stories. If you found our conversation valuable today, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend, and make sure to subscribe to Productside Stories so you don't miss a future episode.
Thank you for tuning into Productside Stories. I hope today's insights inspire you and propel your product journey forward. Remember, every challenge is a lesson waiting to be learned. And you can also visit us at productside.com for more free resources like webinars, templates, playbooks, and other product wisdom repackaged for you. I'm Rina Alexin, and until next time, keep innovating, keep leading, and keep creating stories worth sharing.